Hello everyone, welcome to WJBX. My name is John Nuzzolese and my mission is to help landlords everywhere avoid expensive tenant problems and bad situations while dealing with your rental properties. Now, I'm also a licensed real estate broker in the business since 1979 and a real estate investor myself, and a landlord and property manager too. Over the last 36 years, I've accumulated many hard-learned lessons. And over the last 16 years, I've been sharing and coaching and teaching other landlords ways to make more money through the finding and keeping of better tenants. And that's through the use of my website, the Landlord Protection Agency. Welcome to Landlord's Corner. I'm John Nuzzolese.
And I'm Jeannie Nuzzolese.
We're here to talk about landlording topics, just like we did in last week's Saturday night episode here on WJBX 101.5 and 104.3. And I hope you're ready to take some notes, or if you're driving, I hope you'll enjoy the program that we have tonight. I'm going to be going over some topics that we have in my book, Finding and Keeping Qualified Tenants from Pre-Screening to Lease Signing, a step-by-step guide. Jeannie, what are some of the topics we're going to cover tonight?
The 6 biggest landlord traps.
The 6 biggest landlord traps. Have you ever noticed, well, you should know that there are certain common situations that happen when you're renting properties and dealing with tenants, and we call those landlord traps, and I'll explain some of them.
Because we don't want you to fall into them.
Yes, avoid them at all costs.
Okay. And we're also going to be talking about preparing and showing your rental property.
Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. It's very important to know what you're doing step by step and follow a good process each time, and don't forget any of the important steps.
And also what not to say to prospective tenants.
Have you ever said something to someone and as soon as the words left your lips, you regretted it? You knew you shouldn't have blabbed it out? Well, some landlords do that too. I've done it. You've probably done it too. So many people say things, the exact things they shouldn't say to prospective tenants. And I've got a few of those, and you might find it a little amusing.
All right, we're going to begin by talking about the 6 biggest landlord traps. Even landlords who've been around a long time have fallen into these common landlord traps. Now, what's landlord trap number 1?
Landlord trap number 1, I'd have to say, is improper screening. And if you listened last week on Saturday, you heard me say 95% of tenant problems can be eliminated in the screening process. I'm a broken record with that. I'm always saying it, so I apologize if you keep hearing it and you get tired of it. But keep it in mind because it's so true. Believe it or not, many landlords still are very trusting and comfortable with the basic rental application or a handshake. And the eviction courts are full of landlords who like to trust their gut feeling. The Landlord Protection Agency highly recommends that you use our rental application or another comparable application that is designed to protect the landlord. Rental applications are powerful screening tools when you verify all the information that they contain. And let me just make a quick mention that before you spend money on a credit report, verify the information on the rental application first. The idea is to eliminate the bad tenant, not spend money on a bad tenant just so you can see a bad credit report. Eliminate them first. And if you can do that, you save the money and move on to the next person.
Okay, so what's trap number 2?
Trap number 2, landlord trap number 2, is advertising. And think about it. In this day and age, do you really have to spend a lot of money to advertise your rental property? You really don't. You can list your rental property on any one of some very popular internet websites for rentals. And there is Trulia, there is Zillow, there's Postlets, which is now part of Zillow. And of course, there's Craigslist. And there are so many more that you can take advantage of. But advertising should not be an expense that you need to pay as a landlord. And you can also just list with a real estate. If you have a good experienced real estate agent or a rental agent or property management company, they'll take care of getting the people. But screening and you overseeing the screening, I think, is so very important.
All right, now trap number 3.
Trap number 3. Well, this is a landlord trap. A lot of people and some of the real estate agents might not like saying it, but remember, I'm a real estate broker too. And you know, in this business, there's good and bad. But relying on non-landlord agents, I think, is landlord trap number 3. So many landlords will rely on a real estate agent because they're a licensed real estate agent and it's their job to help you. But when you think about it, it's their job also to earn a commission. And if they're not an experienced landlord or an experienced good property manager, how can someone who's never experienced the same responsibilities advise you of how to rent your property? So you want to know you're dealing with someone with good hands-on experience dealing with rental properties. So if you're forced to use an agent inexperienced in landlord matters, be sure to do the screening. Even if you're using an experienced agent, oversee the screening yourself. And I recommend you use the LPA rental application, or make sure that their application covers the things that you want it to cover.
That's very good advice.
Well, thanks.
What is trap number 4 then?
Trap number 4 is a very, 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 very big no-no that some landlords do. And I always try to advise them not to ever do it. And that is developing friendships with tenants or renting to family. Don't do it. Trust me. It's not that I've rented to family. What I'm telling you is every time I see it, it never ends well, and there's such nightmares. Just go on the LPA's Ask the Attorney page, and you'll see how many terrible situations people are asking the attorney about how to get rid of a relative in their rental property. It's
That's
a nightmare. So as far as dealing with friendships and tenants, think about it. Is it possible for a tenant to take advantage of a good rapport with his landlord? Of course it is. It happens all the time. And allowing tenants to cross the professional line can be a very big mistake. Are they friends or are they tenants? That's the way you have to look at it. It can be one or the other, but not both.
Okay, now trap number 5.
Trap number 5 is using a substandard lease. And what I mean by that is you want to use a lease agreement that is designed to protect the landlord, a landlord lease. Of course, I recommend the LPA lease, but you can use another lease if it is written to protect the landlord. And I think we've got the best lease, and I'm kind of partial to that, but there are other good ones out there too. It's so important that you have the protection that you need and have the items that commonly come up in a rental tenancy so that you're able to deal with it. And also keep in mind, the LPA lease on our website is state specific. So we've got one that complies with each state across the country. You want to choose your state.
Okay, and so what's trap number 6, the last one?
Landlord trap number 6 is paying for tenant screening. Now, I have a lot of people that I know that pay for tenant screening. And we also have quick check credit reports as part of the Landlord Protection Agency as a tenant screening agency, where you can get credit reports and criminal background checks and eviction reports and histories like that. And do you have to pay for that? Well, depends on how you look at it. If you use the LPA rental application that provides for a tenant-paid screening fee, like most professional management companies do, and more professional landlords do require the tenants to pay a screening fee. Hey, your time is worth something. Even if you don't order a credit report, well, many landlords pay someone to do the verification of the rental application. And that's important, even if you don't order credit reports and criminal background checks. But another thing I want to mention, though, is the tenant paid screening fee is also a screening tool. Like, let's say you charge $25 as a tenant screening fee with your rental application. Some people call it an application fee. Well, if that $25 is enough to deter an applicant who thinks they're qualified to rent your property, good riddance, because there was probably something that they did not want you to see on their credit report. So it's also a tool. Now, of course, if your rental screening fee is too high on your rental application, like let's just say you're asking a $200 rental application fee, like I see in Naples with some of these condo associations, well, I got to tell you, that might deter a rental applicant. They don't want to throw too much money out the window. But a reasonable screening fee will not scare away a good tenant.
I know everyone has their own way of doing things, but John, what's your system for showing a rental property?
Well, being prepared first before your appointment is very important, and having your rental property ready to show is only part of being prepared. Remember this quote. I have it on my office wall, and I try to remember it all the time. I say it to my kids, and I try to live by this. Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Think about that for a second. Isn't that so important? And it's something to keep in mind in everything we do. So with your rental property, have you ever found yourself at an appointment and realized that you forgot to bring the rental applications? Or you realize that you meant to spray some air freshener or replace some light bulbs if you're doing a nighttime appointment? Think about all these things before you go on the appointment, and have the property prepared and have yourself prepared with what you need. And it's important to have your property what I call show ready. So make sure the unit is ready to be shown, clean and empty, if it's unoccupied, that is, and clean and neat if it's occupied. And if you're showing an unoccupied rental, like I said, replace light bulbs, make sure that everything is well lit for people to see, and that's a turnoff when people can't see very well in the rental showing appointment. Bring a can of air freshener. If the property's been closed up and might have odors, it's great to freshen it up before you bring someone to take a look at it. Have disposable wipes or paper towels in your car. You know I've often wiped up little smudges and dirt on rental appointments, only just to get it ready so that it doesn't look bad. If you ever see a bug laying around, it's a good idea to get rid of that too. Make sure the front door is clean, and if there's a screen or storm door, that the window is clean. And it's always good to have those wipes with you. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Like I said, remember the keys. In the excitement of having an appointment, it's amazing how many people meet the tenants at the rental only to realize they forgot the keys. I've done it, and I don't know if you have, but it can be embarrassing and a waste of time. Have your rental applications with instructions on how to submit the completed application. Unless they're going to give it to you on the spot, but it's good to have instructions on how to submit that rental application. Remember to bring your prospect's information and phone number with you in case you need to contact them in the event of a delay. I hate being stood up. That's why I always do the open house. Have your cell phone. Don't forget that, because you might need it. I mentioned an open house. Well, it's one of my favorite ways to show properties. When I'm showing a rental property, I like to arrange it to be a multiple showing. I set aside an hour for a particular day, like a Sunday between 1 and 2, And I try to send a dozen or so customers, and I'm not always that lucky to have a dozen at once, but I like to have a number of people come, and I have plenty of applications with me, and I'm prepared to answer questions about the rental. I usually bring one or two tag team partners with me on the rental showing. This way, we all can take the different people around the rental property and show it and answer questions. It's good to have a little bit of a team when you're showing your rental properties in this situation, the open house style. And the whole time you can be analyzing the tenants and evaluating them of who you think is good and who you're going to eliminate. But the nice thing about the open house style of showing is that there's a feeling of competition between the prospects, and they realize that you have a hot item that you're showing and that they would be lucky if they're chosen. But it's always good. There may only be one qualified person in that group, if that, but they all feel like it's a hot item and that they would be lucky to be chosen. And in many cases, they're willing to submit their application on the spot in order to be the first one to submit. But of course, we always let them know that the most qualified applicant will be the one chosen. This has been a great time saver for me, and it makes getting the rental rented a little bit more fun.
You mentioned that the screening process is ongoing, even when you're showing the rental property. Can you explain how you continue to screen tenants while you're showing something?
Yeah. Well, as you're showing the rental property, like I said, you're evaluating the prospects because they're asking questions and you may be asking them questions, and you're also seeing how they respond to the property and how they respond to you as the person who's showing them the property. So that's all very important, and it's part of the screening process. So we all have our own style in showing the rental, but it's important to be aware of those telltale signs to watch for while you're evaluating your prospective new tenants. So one of the things is appearance. Is the prospect neat and clean? Do they make an attempt to make a good impression for you? I know if they think I'm just a worker or I'm just a representative of the management company, they may let themselves slip and not really care about how they present themselves to someone who's just a worker or just an employee. So that's something to watch out for. And are they neat and clean? Like, are they unkempt? Are they sloppy? Their car. Do they have a nice car? How do they keep their car? Sometimes a really, really sloppy car could be a bad sign about how they live. Their attitude and manners. Are they respectful? Are they showing signs of being difficult to deal with? Remember, these are going to be your tenants that you have to deal with once they're in your property. So I like to look for little things like, did they wipe their feet on the way in? Did they walk into the house while smoking? For us, our rental properties are all no smoking allowed. So I know if someone walks in with a cigarette, they're automatically disqualified because we don't accept smoking. Do they criticize the property? Some people feel that they're going to get a better deal if they put down the property and they start criticizing it. And they might feel like that's a negotiating tactic, or that they can get leverage on getting a better price. But that's really a mark against them, in my opinion, someone that criticizes the property, unless it's really a valid question about something that obviously needs to be done. But I don't like when people criticize the property, because if they really are making an offer on it and they want it, the criticism is usually, in most cases, to try to negotiate and put the property down.
Also, sometimes if they think that you're just working for the management company, they'll let slip something that they did or something that speaks of their character. I remember specifically one time a man telling you something that he did to his property to get back at his landlord.
Right. I remember that too. That was in Hicksville, New York. And this guy came with his son, and was bragging to me about how he's going to burn his current landlord. And he didn't know that we were the landlords. He thought that we were just there cleaning up because we told him we're just here cleaning up today and getting it ready. And so he really didn't care what he said to us. And this guy was explaining how he's actually drilling holes in the roof.
Ooh.
Because he really hates his landlord and wants to really fix him. So he was drilling holes in the roof because he was being very, very spiteful.
Well, he helped us out. He let us screen him really easily right there.
That's right. That's right. He filled out the application on the spot too, and couldn't understand when he didn't get the place. But there was no way we wanted that guy. I think it's best to just keep in mind when you show a property to people, it's beneficial if they don't see you as the owner. It's okay to be the owner, but if you tell them that you work with the management company or you're there helping out that day to show the property, I think it's a very good way to handle it where they don't see you as the owner, because you can gain very important insight to the tenant and their situation. And in many cases, they'll open up with you a little bit better when they're not trying so hard to impress the owner. So keep that in mind. It's nice to be able to say, well, you're a partner, or I work with the management company, or I'm helping out today. And, and I have a lot of friends who also will present themselves as the handyman or the maintenance person. And you can even say you're the maintenance person if you're over there doing work while you're showing the rental property. It doesn't mean you're not the owner, but it helps the prospective tenants to feel more comfortable, and they usually will say things that they might not say to the owner who they're trying to impress. Uh-oh. That's the red alert sound for tenant excuses. Jeannie, do you have any new tenant excuses to share with us?
Yes, this is one of the excuses that we got. I slipped on the front steps and broke my ankle. My lawyer says not to pay because we're suing you.
That turned out to be an eviction, and she admitted that it was due to her own clumsiness. I'm very glad that it went through the insurance process. Very important to have good renter's insurance on your rental properties. And the insurance company did handle the lawsuit and helped us get them evicted too. You got another one?
I'm waiting for my tax return.
Okay, you guys out there, if you're rental property owners and landlords, I'm sure you've heard that one too.
Okay, I have one more, but because it's so disgusting, I want you to say it.
Okay. I have roaches in my underwear.
Oh.
Now, this is true, and one of my partners in one of his first rental properties had a tenant use this as an excuse to not pay the rent. She was basically complaining because she created a very bad roach problem, and she wanted to show him that the roaches were even in her underwear drawer. He was after these people ever since they brought their little friends with them to at least make an effort to keep the rental clean and cooperate with exterminating. So the tenant's late every month and always has a new excuse, and I'll never forget this roaches in her underwear excuse. Let me stress to you, it's very important to have a good pests clause that covers things like infestations of roaches or ants, or even animals like squirrels or mice. Part of maintaining the home is keeping it clean, free of bugs and wildlife, and we expect our tenants to do that because we want people who are going to be responsible for the property as if it's their own. It's very important. A good pest clause in your lease is something like this, that the tenant agrees to be responsible for the extermination of any insect or wildlife pests infestation during or as a result of the tenant's occupancy. We have that in all our lease agreements. In many cases, if a tenant has left leaving any kind of infestation. Landlords have to get that done before new people come in. But you should also make the tenant responsible for it too. I think it's better that way, and it takes a little bit of the liability off the landlord, although you do want to solve these problems right away. So if you have a tenant complaining about a problem like this, you do want to make sure it gets done properly. So it's a good idea to get an exterminator over there, even if it is the tenant's responsibility. It's your property, and you want to make sure this isn't a problem that gets worse and worse.
Okay, we mentioned that we were going to talk about what not to say to prospective tenants. What are some of those things?
Well, as important as it is to sell tenants on your rental property and say the right things, you definitely want to be aware of the wrong things and the things not to say. And as a real estate broker and a landlord myself, I've learned the hard way, and also seen many, many other landlords learn the hard way too. Now, I don't want to put myself in the same class of some of these guys because I've heard some pretty bad things. And it can only either get them in trouble or just turn off the prospect or make you look really dumb or have it come back and bite you. So things like that do happen. So think before you speak. And it makes me think of the quote from Abraham Lincoln that says, "It is better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and remove all doubt." Now, when you're showing rental property, of course, you need to tell the people about the property and be able to answer questions. And, it's important to say the right things. And most savvy landlords who are experienced in renting properties know the right things to say, and they know what stupid things not to say to prospective tenants. So one of the things that's not good and can get you into trouble is making discriminatory statements. And I've seen it many times where a landlord will say either on the phone or even in person while they're showing the place that they would try to discriminate, and they might say something like, "I don't think you'd be happy here. This is an all whatever type neighborhood." Now that can get somebody in a lot of trouble. Or they might have someone of a certain ethnicity come take a look at the place that they would say, "I don't like the smell of that kind of cooking. We won't be able to deal with that because this is a two-family house."
That's bad.
Yeah, that's really bad. Then we've had this one. I don't even know if I should say it on the radio, but we've had landlords say, "Hey, are you two a gay couple?" Now, I've had really good experiences with gay couples, but it's not the kind of question you ask them when
Right.
they're looking at the rental unit.
Right.
And also, marital status is another thing you're not supposed to discriminate against. And there are so many landlords, usually the mom and pops, they don't know better, and they'll say, "I only rent to married couples. I need to see your marriage license." And that happens very often too. But these days, in the political climate we're in and all the different laws and regulations, you need to be aware of keeping it legal and not saying the wrong things.
Right.
Another thing a lot of landlords, private landlords, say is, "I want the rent in cash." Statements like that can lead the tenant, and sometimes correctly, to the conclusion that the landlord's not reporting his rental income on his taxes.
Oh.
So that could be an indicator that the landlord's not paying his taxes or reporting his income.
Mm-hmm.
And tenants, if you have a squabble with a tenant, they wouldn't hesitate to call the IRS and make an accusation. So that's not a good idea to require that the rent to be in cash or to say that to prospective tenants.
Right.
Other landlords, will brag about where they live. They feel superior to the tenants. And I know a few different landlords who are a little bit on an ego trip. I don't know if you guys have ever seen anyone like that, where they feel that because they're a landlord, that they're more important than tenants are.
Right.
And some of these landlords get me mad because they don't like giving tenants a good piece of property. So they deserve the bad tenants that they get, because a good tenant will be attracted to a good piece of property that's a rental, and a crummy property will only attract bad tenants.
Mm-hmm.
But these landlords like to brag about themselves. They'll show up to a rental appointment in their Mercedes or a very fancy car, and they'll brag about the nice neighborhood that they live in, and pretty much kind of put the tenant down for where they have to rent. But I believe you shouldn't allow your tenants to know where you live, just for privacy reasons, and it's just best not to have tenants come to your house. And tenants don't like to hear about how well off you are and how their hard-earned rent is paying for your mansion and your car.
Right.
Yeah, another one is, sometimes landlords blab. I'm a blabbermouth sometimes. Jeannie gets mad at me. But I try to keep it under control. But sometimes a landlord would say, oh, well, my last tenant owes me 6 months worth of rent, and talk about how they helped the other tenant out and lent the money and things like that.
Oh boy.
That's not a good idea. Even if the landlord did do things like that, he should not share this information with new incoming tenants, because he'll already have
a disadvantage.
Yeah, and he'll have pushover written right across his forehead. So that's not a good idea. And another thing not to say is, my previous tenant is suing me for her security deposit. I've had that said. Why in the world would you share that? It's stupid. It's just people blabbing, but it'll also make the incoming tenant think that the same problem is going to happen to them. So, things like that you shouldn't talk about.
Right.
Another thing I wanted to mention, and this is something not to say, but I witnessed it. Remember that man on Belltop next to Artie's house? The limo driver? Well, it was an older man, and he actually asked the people, point blank, right in the face, he said, "Do you F loud?" And the people looked at me, and we just left. But you knew that guy was going to be a problem. I've never heard.
Why does he have thin walls?
He must have thin ceilings. But that was the craziest, far-fetched one I've ever heard. And I'll never forget it. Neither will those customers.
What about if you find out that there are unauthorized occupants in a rental? What do you do about that?
Well, that can be a real tough situation sometimes, because, you have tenants that, for whatever reason, are letting more tenants into the rental property. I just spoke with someone on the phone yesterday that was having this problem, and she was calling them squatters. But they're not really squatters. They're really guests of the existing tenant.
Mm-hmm.
And you really don't, as a landlord, you really don't have any legal right against the tenant's guests. So she wanted to evict the tenant's guests and keep the tenant who's on the lease. But you can't. Legally, the landlord would have to evict the tenant if they can't get the tenant to comply and get rid of the unauthorized occupants. So, it happens. And some of you guys listening might have had this happen, where you go to your rental property only to have a stranger you don't recognize answer the door. And you're like, well, who are you? And they're like, who are you? I'm the landlord. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's where the tenant assigned the rental to someone else without telling you. That has happened to many people that I know, where the tenant leaves and they put someone else there in their place. And sometimes they're even profiting on an illegal sublet, where your lease might say no subletting allowed, and these people rent out the place, and this illegal occupant is paying the rent to the tenant, and then the tenant's paying you what they're supposed to be paying you.
Uh-huh.
So that's definitely all unauthorized, but it happens where you've got people that are in your property, unauthorized people, and unauthorized pets sometimes. Sometimes they bring in dogs and cats and whatever else. So, how do you feel knowing that you have someone in your property that you didn't even agree to let them live there? So it's kind of a common thing that happens. Fortunately, it hasn't happened much with us. We've been able to, like I always say, 95% of tenant problems can be eliminated in the screening process. I know you've heard it so many times from me, but it's true. If you screen and you get good people, the likelihood of them bringing in unauthorized tenants to live there, to rent out rooms to, or help them pay the rent by renting and living with them, it's not as likely to happen. We have a clause in our lease against that, and it states occupancy by guests staying over 7 days, we have 7 days, will be a violation of this provision. In the event any other people occupy and live in this rental in any capacity without owner's written consent, it will constitute a breach of this lease, and it is agreed that the rent will be increased $500 per person per month, and at the sole owner of the and the owner at his sole option may terminate this lease. So it gives the owner the right to terminate the lease. But the lease isn't always enough to deter this from happening. You know that. If you're a landlord, you know the lease isn't worth anything if it's not properly enforced.
Right.
So, they have to know what they agreed to. You have to have good people that abide by their agreement. So, one of the funny things I always remember about Nick Kuhn from Hard Nosed Landlording, he's been gone a long time now, but this was a master landlord, and he owned and rented out 200 rental properties and managed them all by himself. And when someone got out of line and broke a clause in the lease, violated the lease agreement, and he confronted the tenant with it, he would always remind them that they gave their word and their signature on the lease. And he said, "You told me your word is good." And then they have to explain why their word isn't good and their signature is no good. So he's got no problem upholding the lease and canceling it if they prove that their word and their signature is no good.
So now you send a lease violation notice?
Yeah, now there are 4 ways that you can enforce the lease in this situation. Number 1, you can allow the unauthorized occupant to become an authorized resident if he's cooperative. So you can give that person a rental application and screen him like any other tenant. And if you approve them, have them sign, add them to the lease, making them all 100% responsible. Each tenant is 100% responsible under the agreement. So if you don't do that, you can also send a lease violation notice, you're right, and notify the tenant, your tenant, of the violation of having unauthorized occupants. And I like to also include an intention to vacate form in there for the tenant to give us their own notice that they're leaving voluntarily. This way we don't have to evict them. So a violation notice, and in the envelope, a notice of intention to vacate.
So that's telling them if they don't comply, then they should get ready to get out.
That's right. So you're letting them know that, they have to go, that this lease is being terminated because they broke the rules. Then there's another option, and that is, especially if you have the LPA lease or a month-to-month tenancy, is you can serve a notice of termination of tenancy, giving them 30 or 60 days notice, depending on what your lease provides for. And you give them that notice to terminate tenancy, and they have to get out. The main tenant has to go also, because that's who you have the agreement with. And if your lease doesn't provide for handling an unauthorized tenant situation, you might even want to use a lease update change of terms notice that can modify your agreement. The LPA lease allows you to use that. It provides that you can update the lease if you need to, unilaterally. It's important to know most leases don't allow that. You can't just go changing your agreement whenever you want. But we've tried to give landlords the most power possible, and also remember the quote from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. Very important, okay? I mean, we don't want you using your lease clauses that we give you as weapons. You need to use them responsibly and do the right thing. In many cases, tenants who bring in unauthorized tenants are the type of people who don't always go by the rules. That's why you should always be prepared to have an eviction attorney standing by, because it might be that kind of situation. I always say the best way to avoid tenant problems is to avoid problem tenants. One of the unpleasant aspects of being a landlord is chasing after rent money after the tenant has taken advantage of you and your rental property. Ever had that happen to you? I have, and I know many of you who have been through it too. I've had the pleasure of getting to know a couple of the country's leading experts in the process of obtaining bench warrants and judgments against delinquent ex-tenants. I know a lot of us don't go through the trouble and let that money fly away with the tenants when they take off. But I just want to tell you that Cynthia and Gary Schmidt have been landlords for over 20 years, and they've acquired 90 satisfied judgments and actually collected over $200,000 in back rent. That's $200,000 in back rent that most of us would have thought was lost money after the tenants split and took off. Cynthia will not let people get away with it. She feels very offended when people steal from her, and that's what tenants are doing to you when they take off without paying the rent and leaving you with a lot of damages. Or when I heard that, I thought about all the money I've been beaten out of over the years. I can envision some of my ex-tenants sipping drinks while watching the sunset on a cruise, paid for with my money. I think we can all benefit from learning about how to collect back rents. When you go to my website, landlordprotectionagency.com, go to the products page. When you click on services, go to products, and check out collect back rent. You'll be glad you did.
John, I wanted to ask you, why is it so important for tenants to have their own renter's insurance policy?
It's really very important for you to make sure that your tenants have a renter's insurance policy. Most tenants don't think of it unless you tell them. More and more people are starting to be responsible enough to have it. But what you should understand, and I know some landlords don't know the difference between a rental dwelling policy and renter's insurance.
Mm-hmm.
The rental dwelling policy is like homeowner's insurance, except that you're a landlord and you rent out the property, and the insurance company understands that there are slightly different coverages for people who rent out properties. There may be different types of damages than if it were your home, like a homeowner's policy.
I see.
Now, the difference and why renter's insurance is so incredibly cheap and inexpensive is because renter's insurance only covers the tenant's belongings. It covers what the tenant owns. But there's something else that it also covers, which I found to be incredibly valuable for people who have it. And let me just tell you a quick little story. When I was in New York working as a real estate broker, which I still am, but years ago, I had a guy in a station wagon who wanted to come see a house that we had for rent. And he showed up to the office in the station wagon with a couple of little girls in the car with him. And he wanted to see the house. And I asked him, he told me he was homeless, that their house in Levittown had a fire. That's on Long Island in New York. And there was a fire, and he had no place to go. he didn't have renter's insurance, and he was living in the car with his kids. So I felt really bad because it was very cold. It was winter time, and he had nowhere to go. The sad thing about it is renter's insurance for someone renting a 3 or 4 bedroom house at the time would have been less than $100 a year.
Wow,
Which is
that cheap?
Yeah, and the thing is, they would cover him for staying in the Marriott in a really nice hotel.
Nice.
Renter's insurance would cover for the replacement of all his belongings. Hey, Jeannie, remember we had those people in Verbena in our rental property, and they burned their house down in Merrick, and the insurance company paid the extra high rent because it was a temporary rental, replaced their lawnmower, all new clothes, new TVs, new furniture. The renter's insurance, the insurance company replaced everything for them. It's what the renter's insurance would do for someone who can't stay in a rental property because it's not habitable anymore.
Right.
Another point I'd like to make about renter's insurance is that you as a landlord are more protected by the tenant having renter's insurance. If a tenant has a dog that cuts their foot and they want to sue you for having a sharp object on the property, or the tenant's couch in the garage gets damaged because there's a leak in the roof. These are things that have happened to me in the past. Renter's insurance would cover those things. But think about this. If the tenant doesn't have renter's insurance, who's the tenant going to go to collect from? Whose fault are they going to say it is? So make sure your tenants have renter's insurance, because they can call their renter's insurance company for any losses that they should experience. Without it, they'll always go to the landlord.
All right, John, can you give us any landlord tips?
Well, I'll try to give you a couple of pretty easy ones. Well, what do you do if the tenant doesn't agree to sign your lease? My advice, rip it up. Cancel that lease agreement and just rip it up, because if there are too many things in the lease agreement that the tenant does not agree to, or you're having too much trouble getting them to agree to the items, sometimes it's better to just rip it up and go home and take a couple of Advils. Another very important tenant screening tip is to ask for a copy of a picture ID or driver's license and the social security card of your tenant applicant. Make sure the person in front of you is the same person on the application and on the credit report. I learned that one a long time ago the hard way. Let's see if I have one more for you. I'll try to make it quick because I know we're running out of time. Make copies of rent checks. Always make copies of the rent checks and keep a record of the tenant's checking account. That can come in handy later if you ever have to go after their checking account for collection purposes. Before I forget, I just wanted to remind you to go to landlordscorner.com. Never get stuck with a bad tenant again. And on that page, I've got the free flowchart download in PDF from pre-screening to lease signing. Also, take advantage of the downloadable free prospect card. And also, we've got the 4th of July special. And we've got coupons and discounts and gifts on the LPA website. I hope you take advantage of them. And I hope you have a happy and safe 4th of July. Well, our time is almost up, but I'd love to share with you some of my favorite landlord quotes that you may want to take down or remember. One of my favorites is 95% of tenant problems can be eliminated in the screening process. And those of you guys who may already know me, know that I always say that because I really believe it. Another one of my favorite sayings is, it's better to have no tenant than a bad tenant. You think you know someone? You don't really know them till they've rented from you. The best way to avoid tenant problems is to avoid problem tenants. And in screening tenants, my motto has become guilty until proven innocent. Tenants show their true colors in pressure situations. Just one small tenant problem avoided can be priceless. Whose costly bad experience would you rather learn from, yours or mine? How much did your last tenant problem cost you? If you want to survive as a landlord, you cannot run your business from your heart. You have to run it from the head. And that one was by Nick Kuhn in his course, Hard-Nosed Landlording. Be sure to check out our Landlord specials and free downloads on landlordscorner.com. It includes the LPA seminar package with full access lifetime membership. Never expires, you never have to renew. And that includes the seminar items, the manual, Finding and Keeping Qualified Tenants, the other manual, Landlord Power, 50 Kick-Ass Lease Clauses, the forms disc, including over $1,200 worth of landlord forms if purchased separately, and 2 audio discs, the audio disc of tenant screening and the audio disc of enforcing lease agreements. Check everything out on landlordscorner.com, and we also have other coupons as well for money-saving opportunities. I hope you like it, and good luck. It's all about saving you from tenant problems. If you found value in this information that I've shared with you, I have a small request. I'd love it if you'd share this with a friend that you think might be able to benefit by it on Facebook, Twitter, or just share the URL of landlordscorner.com. It's been an honor to talk with you, and thanks again for listening. This is John Nuzzolese from the Landlord Protection Agency. Have a good night.